For almost all of human history, the deadliest thing you could do wasn't hunting, war, or wild animals. It was giving birth. Not once, but again and again and again. And every one of your ancestors, going back 300,000 years, came from a mother who lived through it, at least long enough. You are the end of an unbroken chain of survivors. So how did they do it? With no doctors, no hospitals, and no idea what was killing them. Almost every other mammal gives birth alone, quickly, and walks away. A human mother, in nearly every culture on Earth, needs help. Why? Because we stand upright, which narrowed the hips, while our babies kept growing enormous heads. The fit is so tight that a human baby has to turn mid-birth just to pass through. And unlike almost every other animal, a human baby emerges facing away from its mother, so she can't reach down and lift it clear the way a monkey can. We are one of the only creatures for whom birth is mechanically dangerous, and one of the only ones that can't do it alone. For decades, one idea explained this: the obstetric dilemma, a trade-off between walking upright and growing big brains. It's still in the textbooks, but now contested. Some researchers argue the real limit isn't the hips, but how much energy a mother can pour into a growing baby before it has to come out. Either way, for the woman in that firelight, birth sat on a knife edge. A human newborn's head is enormous for its body, packed with a brain that keeps growing for years after birth, long after other animals are up and running. That oversized head is the gift that makes us human. It is also the exact reason being born came so close to killing the ones who carried us. And yet, every mother in that unbroken chain walked this same edge and lived, not by luck and not once, again and again for 300,000 years. Which turns the question inside out, not why human birth is so dangerous, but how they kept surviving it. And you'd assume it was always this deadly, a fixed price of being human. It wasn't. For much of the deep past, birth may have been safer than it later became. Hunter-gatherers were often lean, strong, and well-fed on a wide diet, and women squatted constantly to forage, to cook, to rest, a posture that opens the pelvis wider and kept the body rehearsed for birth. Then we settled down. Farming brought crowds, and with them a narrower diet, more disease, harder labor, and, eventually, beds and chairs instead of the squat. The skeletons tell part of the story. Across many regions, humans grew shorter and showed more disease and hard wear after farming spread than the foragers before them. A smaller, more depleted mother is a mother in more danger. So by the time of towns and cities, women were often worn down before labor even began and surrounded by strangers. Progress, for a long stretch, did not make birth safe. It made it more dangerous. And in the crowds it created, something no one could yet see was quietly getting stronger. So if the danger was rising, who was keeping mothers alive? The answer was never a doctor. It was other women. In nearly every human society ever studied, birth was attended by a midwife, a grandmother, sisters, the whole band gathered close. And they knew things it would take modern medicine centuries to rediscover. Let the mother move instead of holding her still. Keep her upright, not flat on her back. Be patient. Reach in and turn a baby that was stuck. Use plants that dulled pain or slowed bleeding. Thousands of years ago, in Egypt and later in Rome, women gave birth on a birthing stool, sitting upright, held open, letting gravity do part of the work. The design was so sound that versions of it are still in use today. This is the oldest medicine there is. Older than farming, older than writing, carried hand to hand, mother to daughter, across thousands of generations. And it came with a quiet second job, keeping the newborn warm and fed in a world where a cold or hungry infant rarely lasted long. And it worked, but only up to a point. In pre-industrial Europe, parish records show roughly 1 mother in 100 died in every birth, about 50 times the risk today. And remember, she gave birth again and again. The skill of the midwives had hit an invisible ceiling. Something was killing mothers that no amount of care could stop, because the deadliest thing in the room was something no one could see. It was Fever. A few days after a birth that had gone perfectly, a mother would burn with fever and die. They called it childbed fever, and for centuries they blamed it on bad air, on grief, even on the woman's own body. The truth was almost too ugly to accept. It was the helpers. As birth moved into hospitals in the 1700s and 1800s, doctors went straight from one mother to the next, and worse, from cutting open the dead to delivering the living, without ever washing their hands. They were carrying the killer on their own fingers. In 1847, in Vienna, a physician named Ignaz Semmelweis noticed that one maternity ward killed far more mothers than the ward right next to it. The deadly one was run by doctors, the safer one by midwives, who never touched the dead. He ordered the doctors to scrub their hands in chlorine before every delivery, and the deaths on his ward collapsed. In its worst months, that ward had been killing as many as one mother in 6. After the hand-washing rule, the dying fell to match the midwives' ward, a few in 100. He had found it, and for saying so, he was mocked, forced out, and died in an asylum of an infected wound, the exact thing he'd spent his life warning about. It took the world decades to admit he was right, but once it did, the number that had held for all of human history finally broke. For 300,000 years, the odds barely moved. Then, inside a single human lifetime, they fell off a cliff. Clean hands, antiseptics, then the first real antibiotics that could beat the fever outright, sulfonamides in the 1930s, then penicillin in the 40s, finally killing the infection that had killed mothers for millennia. Safer ways to stop a hemorrhage and to replace lost blood. Around 1935, maternal deaths across the wealthier world began to plummet and kept falling year after year until a risk of 1 in 100 became closer to 1 in 10,000, a 99% drop. The single most dangerous act in human life became one of the safest, not gradually across the ages, but almost overnight. Step back far enough, and every person alive is the last link in an unbroken chain, 100,000 mothers deep, each of whom survived the most dangerous day of her life, at least long enough to pass it on. The women in that firelight were already halfway to the answer. Keep her moving, keep her calm, keep the room clean. They just couldn't see the final piece. On the scale of that whole long story, birth stopped being a gamble with death. You were born on the safe side of a line that almost none of your ancestors ever got to stand on.